Good afternoon. Welcome to the Cannabis Business Opportunity presented by Chiba Cannabis Academy, Gibbs Business School, and Coop, who are an organization based within the University of Pretoria framework dealing with cannabis. I'd like to invite you all to this session. Today's session, we're going to focus very specifically on the business of cannabis. We're going to outline where the opportunities are. Some of you on this webinar might be investors. You might be people wanting to start small businesses. So we're really going to focus on the mainframe and the supply chain of the industry so we can establish where we need to grow, where we're strong already, and how we can really bring this industry online, because it's an exciting industry with huge potential, but we need a lot of work to bring it online to realize its full potential. Before we start, I'd like to bring in our guests. So guys, if you just want to unmute your mics and take your cameras off, I'll bring you into the room and we'll do a quick run around the room. So, Tebogo, do you want to start? Just tell people, tell the nation who you are.
Thanks, Trenton. Hi, everyone. My name is Tebogo Tlhopane. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Am I audible? Good, super. My name is Tebogo Tlhopane. I'm a founder of BioMoti. BioMoti is a company founded with the basis of allowing to provide natural-based medicine to the public. I mean, as it is, the feeling is that there's not enough natural medicine available within the space of your pharmacies and various other places. It's really more of your allopathic medication. And I think BioMoti's focus is to be able to create an environment where we can give patients and customers the option to treat their ailments using natural medicine. And cannabis became a natural progression to that. And it's an amazing medicine we find. And research after research is showing the amazing potential that cannabis has as a medicine within the space that we are at. And it's not just South Africa, it's a global phenomenon. I think the day when we discovered that cannabis is a medicine, it became a rush of understanding what it is. And we really owe this to some of the amazing professors in Tel Aviv University that actually found this. And BioMoti, really, we've been around for the past 4 years, and our focus has always been making sure that we're making the best possible for the public. We can be found in participating pharmacies, health stores, and pet stores. We also have a very wide range of pet medicine. So I'm very excited to be part of the panel in order to really unpack this opportunity that South Africa has. I think the feeling, and I think around in terms of the all the colleagues and competitors alike, the feeling is that it seems that there is not really much of an agency within the government concerned, and even the relations themselves, they seem to be not in line with what's going on internationally. And I think the platform will allow us to unpack some of these challenges that are there and be able to really see if we can find a common ground and a way to move forward at a much more better, cohesive way. Thank you, Trenton.
Thanks, Tebogo. Brett, over to you.
Hi, Trenton. Hi to everybody. I come from an old school journalism, hard news background. I cut my teeth at Prime Media at Radio 702, where I covered the Mandela era and unbanning of the ANC, and then went on to help launch Cape Talk Radio, develop iAfrica.com's internet strategy, before leaving the corporate world and buying a sort of bricks and mortar souvenir publishing business, which I fortunately jettisoned just before COVID. I relocated to Limpopo, and the first opportunity that that Cannabis Africa is a breaking news and content service for the emerging African legal cannabis market. And it was the ideal kind of business to emerge from a COVID environment. It was put together as a family business. My son, who's studying software engineering in Berlin, helped me conceptualize the template and the format, and one of his friends, Manos Romano, helped build the platform. And so we launched a couple of months ago into an environment which is going very heavily online. And what has amazed me is the thirst for news that is out there. We've gone from having 2,500 regular monthly users a month ago to close on 7,000 as of yesterday, and it's growing every day. So certainly, if you have a look at the media activity in this space, and really I'm reporting on the deals that are going on, the things that are happening in policy and legalization, you can already feel if the money's not quite there yet, certainly there's a lot of underground or intense activity that's heading that way. And I think the cannabis boom is on its way. It's unstoppable, but that doesn't mean that there's money to be made for everybody. Back to you, Trenton.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's why we're here to unpack, is there money? Where is the money? And what do we need to do? So thanks for that, Brett. Sibusiso, how's it? Quick introduction from you.
Hi, Trenton, and welcome to everyone joining us today. Obviously, a big thank you to Chiba, Coop, and Gordon Institute of Business Science for organizing. By way of introduction, my name is Sibusiso Laba, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Africa Cannabis Advisory Group. We're a services provider that works with a broad range of stakeholders in the industry, including governments, corporates, entrepreneurs, communities, and research institutions. And we specialize in the conceptualization or formulation of cannabis strategies or plans, and then on the execution of those plans. So we've got a very strong focus on strategy and strategy development, on investor readiness and capital raising, on global sales and distribution, and on brand creation and marketing. We've been around since 2019. So thank you, everyone.
Great, thanks, Sibs. Pierre?
Hello, everybody. Yeah, thanks to Gibbs Coop and obviously Chiba. Thank you. I see we've got 145 people online here. That's a great audience. My background is I come from the media industry. I'm a media entrepreneur. I was involved in starting some media brands. You may know of ETB, YFM. A few years ago, I got into the cannabis industry. And I operate in various capacities. Probably the two that are relevant to this webinar is I'm the joint CEO of a cannabis-focused fund where we raise capital called Silverleaf Investments. And I've recently combined my consulting business with Schindler's and Sativius to form a new consulting company called the Greenhouse Project. And we consult on all aspects of the cannabis industry. We're trying to be a one-stop shop. So the lawyers handle the legal side, the pharmaceutical license side is handled by Sativius, who are experts in that field. And my area is really business readiness. So that's very broad, from business plans to sourcing suppliers. And we're looking to work with all the leading players in the industry. Thanks, Trenton.
Great, thanks, Pierre. Yeah, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Trenton Birch. I head up Chiba Africa. We run Craft Cannabis TV, as well as Africa's first cannabis educator called Chiba Cannabis Academy. What's really inspiring to hear about your backgrounds is that you guys are really serious people with serious business acumen, a lot of under your belt. So it's very inspiring to see such high caliber of personnel entering the industry. And I think that's what we need in order to move this forward. I just want to give a quick intro in terms of the cannabis opportunity, and I don't expect this to be necessarily contextualized because these numbers in isolation might not mean a lot. But there's a global think tank called Prohibition Partners. They do a lot of research in the space. If you look at the top there, by 2024, they reckon the industry will be $103 billion globally. If you look at the one below, South Africa, Africa is 7.1 billion by 2023, and South Africa 27 billion rand. The point of this is that there is a sizable opportunity globally for cannabis, and something to be taken very, very seriously. And I think this is quite interesting. I don't know if this is a good or bad thing that the prevalence of cannabis is higher in Africa than anywhere else. But it again shows you that there's a huge market opportunity. I mean, all of that to pretty much it will be illegal at the moment. But the opportunity to move that from an illegal into a legal space, I think, is immense. And if you compare that to other regions in the world, we have a really, really good opportunity to make a thriving, successful industry that can hold its head up high globally and internationally. In terms of the usage, I always find this quite amusing. Sadly, South Africa, the Nigerians are higher consumers than anybody, but I guess they've got larger numbers. but almost 15 million people consume cannabis on a regular basis in Nigeria. Again, the opportunity to sort of legitimize this whole industry is really substantial. And then for those of you who are new to the cannabis industry, I just want to quickly unpack the value chain. So cultivation, often when people talk about getting into the cannabis industry, they talk about growing, whether it's as a venture capitalist or investor. Everybody looks at growing as the only thing in cannabis. But in order for the cannabis industry to come online, we need the whole value chain. So we want to unpack some of those things in this session. Extraction is important when you're actually taking the cannabinoids out of the biomass and extracting it into oil and other sort of mediums. There's the genetics. Genetics is a massive part of the industry. Testing, and then the sort of more peripheral stuff, media, retail, accessories, ancillary services, whether it's security, whether it's courier companies. All of these things need to plug in to make this a successful industry. And then we've, of course, got recreational and medicinal and industrial. And just for clarity, recreational is for sort of private adult use, responsible adult use. There's all kinds of different phrases that are used. Medicinal is used for medicinal reasons, whether that's on an entry level, general anxiety, a bit of pain, or on a much more serious level, with cancer, epilepsy, etc. And then there's industrial hemp, which is a big buzz at the moment in terms of licenses that are on the cusp of being handed out. But industrial hemp also, you can grow CBD with industrial hemp as well. But the opportunity for industrial hemp is huge as well. But there are some barriers which we'll unpack in this session. So I think what I wanted to just start with is, guys, I really want to just unpack the strengths. So where are our strengths as a nation? Sibs, maybe you could talk about that first. What are the key things that we're doing really well already?
Sure. So it's an interesting question, mostly because of the fact that if you look at South Africa's cannabis industry, it hasn't actually quite, let's say, left second gear in terms of the legislation and regulatory framework for it to really be a fledgling industry. There has been progress made to date, and some very encouraging signs, which I think actually puts South Africa amongst the top countries in the world in terms of political will to develop and build the industry. So some of those are the Concord ruling in 2018 that made private growing and consumption of cannabis a human right, was the rescheduling of THC and CBD, allowing for at least the beginning of a CBD market or cannabidiol market, which is one of the compounds within cannabis that isn't psychoactive. And then the issuing of medical cannabis licenses. I think to date there's about 29 licenses that have been issued, around 200 applications, and the hemp permits. So we've sort of had a little bit of a mixed start, if you will. And there certainly has been strong indications that we want this to be a priority industry. But the frameworks around ensuring that it's a fledgling industry just aren't there as yet. But even with that being said, I think it's been very encouraging in terms of the broad range of entrepreneurs that are really going into this industry head first. I think at Africa Cannabis Advisory Group, I think we're probably sitting on something around 400 business plans or applications for capital over the last 2 years, which just shows the level of enthusiasm in this industry in South Africa. But just maybe very briefly to touch on kind of some of the natural strengths from a South African perspective in this industry. Number one is from an African perspective, we're very advanced in the way of infrastructure that will allow that'll enable the growth of this industry faster than other African countries. We've got an extremely skilled and mature labor force, which includes specialists in the agri sector, the pharmaceutical sector, the botanical sector, engineers, and all of these skilled laborers are going to be extremely important for the development and growth of this industry. And then lastly, I would say that the natural base or foundation of this industry is going to be, I think, on the agricultural side in terms of large scale production on the hemp side and sort of bespoke sort of growing techniques on the medicinal side and strains on the medicinal side and so forth.
Thanks for that, Sibs. I think it's a very important point. I mean, we often compare ourselves to, when we talk internationally, we're often looking at the Europeans and the Americans who have infrastructure. So we don't have a competitive advantage there, but I guess certainly we do have a competitive advantage across continentally because of the infrastructure we can plug into. Pierre, we're quite well known internationally as a cannabis country. Is that a strength? Is that a weakness? And how did that happen?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic strength. We've got strong genetics. Durban poison is the one that's always mentioned. So it's built a name for Africa and cannabis and South Africa by association. So we've got a very good reputation because of our history. So our other strength is we've got a lot of farmers. We've got a lot of people who've been growing this crop for a long time. Unfortunately, they've been growing it in an illicit environment, which is not only destructive to them, but destructive to developing a proper industry. So one of our difficulties is going to be transitioning from the illicit market into the legal market. But I think it's a huge opportunity. We've got lots of land, and amazingly, we've got lots of virgin land. We've got the best climate if we talk Africa and South Africa. Our light cycles are right. Cannabis loves Africa, and we've got a lot of land. COVID has actually boosted the economic sector. It's boosted the demand side in America. It was declared an essential crop. So eventually, cultivation is going to go. People use it very negatively, saying a race to the bottom. I see it much more positively. Our competitive advantage is actually low-cost production, but we should not only bank on that. We must do beneficiation. We must do value add. But one of our strengths is that the cost of business in South Africa is relatively low. And I'm not talking about labor. Let's not get me wrong. We need to build a labor-intensive industry because jobs are an issue in our country. We've got a very well-developed economic environment. Our banking system's respected. We have double trade agreements, tax agreements. We're respected in the economic community. And I think that's a lot of comfort for a lot of people. We've also got a strength in that we've got a good potential local market. And I think increasingly we need to change this narrative and talk about how do we play to our own strengths? How do we play to the local market? We're also very well positioned in the export market. We're in the same timeline as Europe. We have strong ties to Europe. So that's another great strength. I think I'll stop there. I've covered a couple.
Yeah, so I'm not sure there's anything left for Brett or Tebogo.
Sorry, Brett.
That's okay. Do you guys have anything else you'd like to add? So any other strengths we have? I mean, I think one of our strengths is that we're quite a famous country, not for necessarily the best reasons, but we certainly are known. We have a big flag that sticks out of the global map. So people do often look to us. Are there any other things, Brett? Maybe you want to jump in there. Any other things you want to add?
I'll jump in and build up on what the most obvious strength that Africa has is that we are world-class leaders in producing recreational adult use marijuana. By government's own estimations, the industry today is worth something like 28 billion rand. There are 3.5 million South African regular cannabis users. A certain amount is going to the local market, but most of it is going offshore, and very little is actually finding its way back to the farmers who are producing the stuff. And I think one of our biggest advantage is that we're so strong in terms of global branding as a recreational cannabis brand, and that at the same time speaks to our biggest weakness, which I won't go into, but it's something that government fails to conceptually grasp. And the other thing about our strengths, I think, that I'd like to say is that Africa has a story to tell. And as Pierre would tell you, that is great for brand development. There's so many brands, cannabis brands, that are waiting here to be developed once the right regulatory frameworks are in place. But we could be world leaders, not in just producing raw bud or hemp for export, but also a whole lot of African brands feeding into places like New York or the States, where there's going to be phenomenal consumer demand in the years ahead. So Africa is very, very well positioned on the world stage in terms of both what we have, although I don't think we're getting the full picture, but we're at a very exciting confluence of technology, agriculture, and health. And I think this is revolutionizing societies across the world, and in particular, South Africa stands to gain particular advantage from this in a way that can spread the skills base, grow the economy, create more jobs, and add spaces for entrepreneurs.
Great, thanks for that, Brett. So, Tebogo, hopefully there's some input for you there after all. They've covered it all, but maybe just leading on from Brett in terms of the African story. And your brand is a very pro-African brand. Even the name it says what it does. You know, the story. Maybe you could expand on that, and then any other input on the kind of strengths we have as a nation, cannabis-wise.
Look, I mean, adding to what Brett has said and everybody else on the panel, is that South Africa itself has an extensive amount of natural plant medicine that is attracted a whole lot of companies all around the world coming here to come and investigate our medicinal capabilities. Hence, you know, your example, some of the strains that come out of South Africa, which is Durban poison, which is very, very well known globally. Even though for some reason, you know, our government hasn't initiated that, you know, that we can protect that brand as Durban poison, because it belongs to us. So, but I think the most strength that we have is around those, and I think adding to what we are doing, and in terms of making sure that these products are actually made here at home, not just growing cannabis, sending, you know, the biomass across to be extracted and then back again and made into product and back again into the country. So we're looking at there's a huge opportunity, and I think we are doing it. And I think a lot of the guys are actually jumping into it as well, where we're actually producing a product from, you know, from scratch from home, because all this infrastructure is around. We've got airports to be able to take the stuff out of the country easily. We've got ports that are international standards. So from a country point of view, we are ready to take over the world when it comes to South African brands. And as you eloquently had said, BioMuti is, you know, it's exotic, especially into those areas in Europe, in the US. We are talking to distributors that side, and they're very excited about just the fact that the name, and it's coming from Africa, you know what I mean? It's got that flair, and it looks great. So I think there's so much we can offer to the rest of the world. We just need to get, you know, all the legislations and everything pointing to the right direction so that we can get this done.
We're definitely going to touch on legislation, but we're going to get through a few more things first. So the general consensus is that we have a great infrastructure here, that we have a global reputation. I mean, the irony is we're all waiting for the cannabis industry to come online, but it already is online. From an illegal perspective, you know, we are moving huge volumes. So we have an infrastructure, but we don't necessarily have a cannabis infrastructure. So while those are weaknesses, I also see those as opportunities. So maybe we could just unpack, you know, for people on this webinar who are maybe interested in investing in the space or trying to figure out where they fit in, you know, outside of, you know, growing is obviously one thing, but if we can touch on some of the other different angles as well. Pierre, what are some of the things that we need to get moving here, so that, you know, say legislation aside, if legislation all opened up tomorrow, what would be some of the things we need to make sure that we can bring it online? What are some of the infrastructure needs? What are some of the services needs?
Sure.
We can unpack some of those.
Yeah, so I'm just going to very quickly summarize on what you alluded to earlier. Let's just say the value chain can be cultivation, processing, distribution, and consumer products and brands. Now the question is, where are the opportunities in South Africa? Now at Silverleaf, we look at the full value chain. There are opportunities way beyond cultivation, and in many senses, cultivation is actually quite high risk in the value chain. For example, Tebogo's got a product he's retailing. There's investment opportunities there. You've got an education institution, Trenton. There's investment options there. So I think as investors or businessmen, we mustn't only get stuck in cultivation. But let's talk cultivation, because a lot of people are focused on that. Again, you need to break down into the sectors or verticals. So there's cultivation for medical. Great. We've got a Section 22(1) license. You apply to SAFPRA. Barriers to entries are higher, so there's opportunities there. Hemp, we don't know. We don't have the legislation. Adult use, we know we're going to have to wait 2 years. The biggest opportunity for the country is probably in the adult use sector. And unfortunately, that's been put at the end of the queue by the government, which we strongly disagree with. We should have that right at the top of the agenda. But if you want to invest in hemp, you've got to get your timing right. You can't plant hemp if you don't have processing. So we need to start looking at the decortication factories. We need to look at second level processing so we can end up in products like biofuels or paper. So the investment...
just for those who don't understand what decortication is, can you just describe what that is quickly? And then also, you know, I believe it's super expensive to bring those plants online, but just give a bit of matrix to that.
Yeah, so very briefly, if you cultivate cannabis and you want to get cannabinoids, you take it to an extraction plant. With hemp, it's a similar thing, except you take your product, you grow it, and you take it to get the fiber, the basta herd, and whatever your end goal is, seeds maybe. But there's a second level step called retting, where you actually have to leave it on the ground for a while. But let's not get stuck in the technical details. It's to take a physical plant and turn it into a usable product. So you would you first level process it, you create the fiber, you separate it, and then you do second level processing, for example, weaving, and then you take it into fabrication. Now, the problem with hemp is if you grow it and you don't have those factories, you're not going to be able to sell it. So that's a huge risk in the industry.
A risk, but also an opportunity for investment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And then the last area is the ancillary services. You know, people spoke about mining. It's not the miners who made the money, it's the guys who sold the picks and the shovels. So these are laboratories, testing stations, compliance, software, media, consulting, licensing. So the abundance of opportunities. And then retail, obviously, we need to get the doctors on board, we need dispensaries, and we need to get products like Biomuti sold by the consumer.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a question that came in which kind of alludes to what I was going to ask Sibs. What is the investment appetite from foreign investors into SA? So I'd like that Sibs, if you could answer that question, and also just if you could also highlight the kinds of businesses and opportunities they're looking at.
Sure. So it's an interesting one because it's fluctuated over the last, call it 3 years or so. Since South Africa started to take steps to establish a legal industry. So the first point, which I think is really important, is that the vast majority of international capital that's come into Africa for cannabis has gone to Lesotho. I think probably 70 or 80%, even maybe closer to 90%.
That's for cultivation predominantly.
Yeah, exactly. That's cultivation, but that's also processing, formulation, labs. It's pretty broad in terms of the types of deals that have gone into Lesotho, but primarily cultivation. Reason being that Lesotho's timing in terms of introducing a licensing regime dovetailed almost perfectly with the emergence of a global cannabis industry. When Canada, being the first G7 country to fully legalize cannabis, came online in 2018. So by our estimates, Lesotho attracted around 200, and for of that size, it's it's a massive shift in terms of investment and economic activity and growth. South Africa, to some degree, I would say, has actually, due to the pace that we had been moving, had missed out on it in terms of political sort of stability and so forth. South Africa would have been a much better investment destination for those investors. Things have changed somewhat over the last 2 years or so, a year or so. And what's really been happening is that the main driver of investment into the African cannabis industry was actually licensed producers or operators. In other words, cannabis companies looking to buy cultivation assets or establish a brand on the continent, or invest in research and development. What's happened over the last couple of years is that those a lot of the leading or the largest licensed producers and cannabis operators have actually been struggling to meet financial projections and so forth. And so what's been the mega trend is that those operators have started to focus on their home markets. So a good example of this is Canopy Growth, which is, for a long time has been the largest cannabis company in the world by balance sheet. And Canopy Growth made a 28 million Canadian dollar investment into Lesotho in 2018, but they withdrew from Lesotho last year with the view of focusing on the US and Canadian market and focusing on developing brands for those markets. So there has been a shift out of international or foreign investors' appetite for Africa. It's still there, but it's much more targeted. And we're starting to see a trend of local investors beginning to develop their capacity and their allocations for cannabis projects. It's a slow transition in terms of the local investors moving into the space, and so it's kind of left a capital deficit in the industry, and that's actually one of the biggest challenges right now.
Great, thanks for that, Sibs. Tebogo, so there's international investment focusing predominantly on cultivation, on putting plants in the ground. From a retail perspective, because that's obviously your game, do you see opportunity for multiple brands to enter the space? Do you think it's cluttered? Do you think that we have a big enough populace with buying power to buy product? What is your perspective on the opportunity for people on this webinar in the retail space?
Thanks, Trenton. I think from a retail point of view, what we see is that there's a lot of products. It's just a question of quality of products in the market and in making sure that what's been presented or what's been written on a bottle, it is what's inside the packaging. And I think that's where the challenge will probably come in, where, and again, being able to understand the difference between, or consumers understand the difference between isolate products and broad spectrum products, because the current legislation is really forcing the CBD manufacturers to look at the isolate more so than to look at the full spectrum or the broad spectrum. Now, what do I mean by that? A cannabis plant, when you do a full extraction, you get all the different cannabinoids, including THC. Now, if hemp is grown with a lesser THC, it means that it could be prevalent in there, but it won't be as high as if it's a high THC plant. Now, if you're going to be making a medicine out of that's going to be sold, the chances are that's going to be much more better use and has much better traction from a user point of view, because of course it's a full spectrum, so you use less. Now, when you're looking at an isolated product, you have to use more. And I think a lot of that has to do with education. More and more people that have bought products in your large retailers like your Clicks and Discount, they don't come back to buy again, especially because what they buy doesn't translate to efficacy for them. So therefore, they don't see a reason to use it. And this is the issue where we think that the legislation as it is, it limits the amount of CBD. We know that it's safe up to 800 milligram a day. So it doesn't make any sense that we're going to have a situation where it is sitting at 20 milligram, because then somebody that has chronic pain, how are you going to deal with that with 20 milligram? It's not enough. So I think with retail is concerned, there's a huge opportunity. There is no such thing as too many products, because if you look at paracetamol, you go to Clicks and Discount, how many different brands of paracetamols are there? How many different brands of aspirins are there? How many different brands of cough syrups are there? So there's a huge opportunity in that there's more space for a lot of people to play. But we need to increase that dosage per day to be at least international standard, not this little joke that we have, which makes it very, very difficult for us to maneuver.
Yeah, absolutely. That's certainly a challenge. But I think the general consensus there is that there is definitely a market for more retail brands in the space, but there are some limitations in terms of legislation. Brett, you're in a fortunate position, thanks to Tebogo, that you have a very bird's eye view on the industry. You see every aspect and every angle of the industry. What in your opinion, are some of the opportunities for growth for South Africans in cannabis at the moment?
Well, I think that just before I go into that, what's very interesting, just following up on what's been talked about so far, is a dipstick into where cannabis is in terms of the mainstream economy, in terms of an overview. And from the bird's eye view, the two JSE listed companies that are cannabis players, that's Labatt and Nutritional Holdings, are both in fairly serious trouble at the moment because they haven't followed through, been able to follow through on funding and revenue projections. Labatt is in danger of losing its listing if it doesn't post its financial year-end results by the end of this month. And Nutrihold is suspended because it's had various cryptocurrency issues and is under investigation there. But that doesn't mean that that big business isn't looking at the market. And if you had to say where is the real market, I'd say follow Johan Rupert and Distel. They've seen that the future of cannabis products lies very heavily in edibles and beverages. Distel and the Rupert family venture capital arm picked up a substantial stake, and I think it was Trueleaf, Relief, the Cape Town company. Yeah. And Distel has got Durban Poison, the brewery brand there. So I think that you can see in the coming months the formation of the sort of South African breweries, as it were, of cannabis products coming out, and the opportunities will really be like craft breweries or artisanal brands that'll come up around there. Otherwise, it's a multinationals game right now. The costs, the barriers to entry are exceptionally high, and there are all sorts of dangers that are attached to that unless we work out a proper regulatory framework that is inclusive of as many people as possible. But at the moment, despite government's good intentions, the cannabis reform spirit isn't quite translating into economic opportunities, except for those with deep pockets and their eyes on the longer term horizon. So it's very frustrating for middle-level entrepreneurs right now, in the absence of a proper legal framework, to know where to invest their money.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to, Pierre, I just want to ask you some questions. So, on the back of that input, Brett, thank you for that. For the viewers, hearing that the two listed cannabis companies in this country are potentially in trouble is worrying. But I think the caveat to that is that yes, we have our challenges, and I'm just trying to be positive from people who want to get into the industry, but also realistic. Is we just need to look at global trends. It's as simple as that. Cannabis is only going one way, and that's forward. So the quicker we embrace that, and the quicker we work through these challenges we have, the sooner we'll get there.
Sorry, Trenton, if I could just chip in there just to finish the narrative earlier. And the two listed companies are in trouble, but that's not necessarily because they're pursuing the wrong strategy. It might be a timing thing, their overseas regulatory hurdles. And it wouldn't be fair to talk about big business without looking at the emergence of our own local giant, which is this amazing merger between Goodleaf, the CBD consumer brand that's looking to go global, and Highlands Investments, which is a leader in cultivation and processing in Lesotho. Now, if we're looking at crafting our own multinationals or giants, that's quite an inspirational story, because that's come out of a merger out of the ashes of Canopy Growth, as you're talking about earlier. That's rising out of that. So the process is going through quite a traumatic space, and the opportunities are going to be opening up and closing down in sort of unforeseen ways over the next 18 months at least.
Absolutely. Pierre, you with Silverleaf, so doing some great work in terms of trying to build investor confidence. I think one of the barriers to entry is confidence. We all know that there are investors out there that are eager to invest in the cannabis space. What are the sort of narratives that you get from potential investors, and what are the challenges you face in making sure that people do understand this is an opportunity? But I think what's also important to understand is this is not a quick money-making scheme. You've got to be in this for the long run, and it's going to take time for it to come online. What are some of the conversations you're having, and what are some of the sort of narratives that you'll have at the moment with potential investors?
Yeah, thanks, Trenton. So again, we live in this dichotomy. I can sit here and roll out plus 60 doubling figures. The growth figures are phenomenal. So on the one hand, we have to sell our industry as opposed to sell our investment fund, because people don't know enough about the industry. And it's quite an easy sell. It's the fastest growing industry in the world. It's exploding. We've had all these Harvest was bought out for $2.1 billion, GW by $7.2 billion. You know, there's a great story there. So on the one hand, the investment managers, the money people, the suits, it's an asset class that they very soon cannot afford not to be in. So it's a really good environment on the one hand. On the other hand, we got the pump and dump guys in Canada. You know, 2 years ago, the index went through the roof. Canopy growth was worth $10 billion, and a year later, it was a bit of mayhem. And I think that didn't do the global trade any good, but we're back on it. We've had 40% growth this year in the indices, so it's looking good. So we're back on it. Let's talk South Africa. Unfortunately, a lot of people who wanted to invest in South Africa ultimately invested in Lesotho. And they created a narrative that said, don't invest in South Africa, it's a regulatory mess. And I'm up against that all the time. And quite frankly, it's very hard to argue differently. I know of people who invested money, they spent 2 years applying for a license, they abandoned their operation. So there's some bad stories. That said, at Silverleaf, we 100% believe the time is right. If you want to make money, and our job is to take money from people invested in the sector and provide a superior return. I think that the time couldn't be better right now. We're at the bottom of the growth curve. We're on the radar, as Sibs alluded to. Nobody in cannabis is not looking at South Africa. Let me tell you, they're watching us like a hawk. So the foreign investment will come in. Our own market, that's the beginning. We could have a hemp permit industry that gets created within 2 months. So I think it's a fantastic time. But the perception is what's changed. And what has changed is we now have a master plan. We now have political will. We've had a whole slew of webinars this week talking about it, provincial level, national level. So I think we're in a very, very good position now. But we are coming from a negative narrative, and we have to undo it.
Yeah, absolutely. Tobacco, just leading on from that, you know, as a retail brand, how important do you think it is that as an industry we self-regulate and we manage ourselves and we do things properly to build that confidence?
100%. I think hence we went together with fellow competitors to form Cannabis Trade Association Africa. And the reason behind that was to self-regulate, make sure that what's written on a pack of a packaging is what's inside, number one, and that the products are made in a proper facility, preferably GMP and so forth and so on. From the regulatory point of view, in terms of making sure that everybody here is in tune with what we're trying to achieve. Now, that same can be said with our ability to be able to lobby, because that CTAA is created for that particular reason. One is to self-regulate amongst everybody else, to say, guys, let's make sure that what we put the product out there is as best as possible, what's written on the label is correct. And then the second part is to lobby the government for some of these regulations that needs to be then made conducive and favorable for businesses to come in. And third, of course, is to try and push, the regulator like SAPRA to be able to, open up the market in terms of opening up the amount of dosages out there. As we speak, according to SAPRA, products that are into water, products that are into gummies, products that are into tea, products that are into honey are literally illegal, according to them, because there's no legislation that governs medicine inside food products. So those are the things that needs to change in order for us to streamline the business so that it can actually, we can see the real value that's coming out of that going forward.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think self-regulation is important in any sunrise industry, especially coming out of a prohibition sort of space. Sibs, just quickly, can we touch on some of the other businesses that are needed to make sure this industry comes online? So we all talk about the growing, but what else do we need infrastructurally? What other kinds of businesses do we need, and where are those opportunities for people to join?
Sure. So there's a whole host of sort of areas where expertise and sort of new businesses are required to help support the growth of the industry. Maybe I'll kick off sort of around sort of the cultivation space, just to maybe look at a couple of sort of real industry needs. Number one, I'd say that there's a need for an expansion in terms of really understanding the different types of genetics within the space, and mapping out how and where these genetics can be applied to sort of growing processes, to sort of climate and so forth. So there's almost a level of development that has to happen around that very early stage of that cultivation process in terms of expertise, IP, registration of that IP, and sort of calibrating growing techniques and methods and so forth for our environment in the global context. Number two, in the way of compliance around cultivation, particularly in medical cannabis, we have a need to continue to improve on the technology that allows us to track and trace the cultivation process that can sort of improve the growing sort of outcomes in yield in these operations, and improve efficiency. So technology around lighting, around HVAC, and so forth. There's a need to continue to improve our output from that perspective. There's also, I think, a significant need, if we thinking about medical cannabis, around testing and laboratories and sort of formulation capabilities and research capabilities around sort of end products. One of the major challenges that we see in the industry is that the local labs aren't actually at a competitive or comparable level or comprehensive level relative to international labs. So there's a deficit in terms of high quality testing of cannabis products, which sort of puts South Africa at a disadvantage, because cultivators now have to ship product to the Netherlands and or other parts of the world and pay thousands and thousands of dollars, whereas that's something that we would really benefit from as a local industry. And I think with that is sort of this research and development aspect of things. We are very enthusiastic about growing and cultivation, but the need to understand how we can formulate certain end products to meet certain needs, whether it's medicinal, wellness, and so forth, is key. I think Brett touched on a really important point around the Distal Rethink thesis of saying that they wanted to invest in a company that in some ways could help illustrate or could help highlight a broader theme, which is around how cannabis can help affect mood in a sense, right? And so there has to be a lot of research capacity and funding, both from private and public sector in our context, in order for us to be competitive. Otherwise, the risk is that we end up being very, very good growers, and everything else in terms of further processing, IP happens in Europe and in the US. And so that's where, kind of strategy and collaboration becomes so much more important if we want to have an industry that's competitive over a very over a sustained period of time.
Yeah, I agree totally. We need to build that capacity out. Brett, you're in the media space in cannabis, which is, I mean, to some degree, an ancillary service. What other ancillary services do you think, in terms of where the opportunities are?
I think starting off the fact that we are primarily in the cultivation and primary producer market, I think the initial things will come in packaging, especially around compliance. There's going to be some work in developing standard units, I suppose, for export. And as we start working together with the 8 other countries that have legalized cannabis for export, I think there's going to be a lot more collaboration around African supplies going into Europe. And I think that from an African continent perspective, I think the packaging and especially around the safety elements of that mixed in with compliance and those kind of services will be, very specialist and niche, but that's where the immediate opportunities are. And I think in media, in education, in getting the word out there, because there's a lot of stigma that's still attached to the cannabis industry. There are a lot of conservative elements in society who would tend towards authoritarianism and blame social evils and on drug consumption and lumping cannabis in with the likes of hard drugs like cocaine, etc. But I think that all of this is. All of these opportunities lie there, but the biggest single challenge right now, as I'm seeing it, and it's highlighted this week, is the absence of the voices of the police force and the Justice Department in the reform initiative. There's not one webinar that I've attended where either representatives from those two departments have attended. And the onslaught against cannabis users, particularly people who are marginalized, who are poor, who live in the Transkei, who can't afford lawyers, is continuing. And this has very dangerous antecedents, or whatever the right word is, for cannabis reform in this country, because it could, as much as it could be a unifying post-COVID economic recovery vehicle, it could also lead to racial division and increased inequality and raise a whole lot of equity issues that we see in the first world cannabis markets.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brett. I mean, just for the viewers out there, just to clarify, as a cannabis industry, there is a lot of frustration around legislation, around the regulators at the moment. We're not going to unpack that in this session, but we are working very hard together as an industry, and also, trying to work with as many government officials as possible to try and move this forward. But it is certainly a common theme in many discussions at the moment. We've got a few minutes left. I want to take a few questions. Grant Mabasa is asking, if I'm willing to invest as little as, say, 2,000 Rand a month, where would be the best sector to invest and get a return? Are there opportunities to sort of micro invest like that? And where would that person start? Pierre, do you want to answer that, or Sibs, either of you guys?
Yeah, I can take that. Look, I think everybody needs to consider investing in this industry. Not only is it going to be a great return, but we investing in the stuff Brett was referring to. We need to create a new kind of industry with different frameworks, with a sharing culture. We need to be sensitive to the economy, that kind of stuff. We need to start at the bottom, grow from the bottom. If we don't include small farmers, we're not going to have a successful industry. So what we did when we created Silverleaf was to actually provide a managed solution for people who want to invest. The barrier to entry was quite high in our initial raise, but we are looking at crowdfunding options. And we think there's a huge market, particularly amongst the youth. They don't have to be convinced about cannabis. They are very supportive. So you will see it, watch your space. Crowdfunding, allowing access for small investors into the industry will definitely be something that's coming.
Great, thanks, Pierre. Sibs, any input on that?
So I'd say that, so there's two avenues of investment. I think if you're talking about that quantum, the first one is investing in your education. So, we've got a long time in terms of the development of this industry. We still, very, very early in sort of the establishment of a proper legal industry. So I think it makes a lot of sense to invest in your education, understanding the industry, getting books, signing up for courses. There's Chiba. Really try to understand the nuts and bolts of how this industry works, because that's going to allow you to make better investment decisions further down the line, instead of perhaps being a little bit more speculative in your early sort of investment activities. Number two, I'd say there are options to invest in listed international cannabis companies. There's a number of listed US companies, there's a number of listed Canadian companies. It is a bit of a minefield for reasons discussed previously, in terms of how the industry was initially set up, with a little bit more of a cowboy approach. But there are companies that are emerging as very, very solid performers, very good at executing, and that would be and those would be quite a relatively safe bet on a broad cannabis thesis. With time, I think Pierre's touched on this and so forth, but I think there's going to be a number of investment opportunities, that can start at as little as 1,000 or 2,000 rand, that are going to, begin to become available in the South African market. But you almost want to have a little bit of time to actually feel that you understand the nuts and bolts of the industry, so that when those local opportunities are there, you have a much higher conviction and belief in sort of how and where you should be playing.
Yeah, great. Agreed. Thanks for that. Brett, I'm going to ask you this. If you can't answer it, don't worry. This is from Sinki Makubu. Wouldn't blockchain tech help with tracking the cultivation process? And I mean, I guess blockchain in general, would it help the industry in terms of transparency?
I think, as someone who's not completely informed on the subject, I'd say the answer is yes, because there's something that's very interesting, and Pierre, you'd probably be more adept at this than I am, but there's something very interesting in the development of cryptocurrencies internationally and the cannabis, the development of cannabis. And I think there are new forms of funding or financing, or ways of storing value or tracking authenticity. But I'm not technologically adept enough to be able to answer that properly.
But principally, you think it's a good idea?
Yeah, I'd say so. But I mean, within who knows what the value in cryptocurrencies are? It's a very volatile market at the moment. But given the absence of traditional banks' involvement in the cannabis industry, particularly in the States where they're prevented because it's illegal still at a federal level, the traditional banking system cannot really get involved in the cannabis industry, and it remains to be seen how that pans out in Africa. But there well could be this rise between African cryptocurrency and cannabis development.
Yeah, great, thanks for that. We're almost out of time. To walk a quick one for you. I know you mentioned this earlier. This is from Martin Cunningham. Do we then find ourselves in the same situation with exporting our natural resources and re-importing them? You touched on that briefly. How do we get around that?
Well, I think we need to build industries here at home as we are doing it. We need to make sure that we are manufacturing these products, adding value to it, beneficiation, as you said. In that way, you have a finished product that will go through, international community as a finished product in a box already labeled to a German language or French or Spanish or whatever it is, even Chinese for that matter. But the main important thing is that if we don't build these capabilities and capacity, then we'll have the same situation we've had with diamonds, the same situation we had with gold. As we speak today, there is absolutely no direction regarding beneficiation of those because it's an afterthought. So here we're saying we're doing it from scratch. And this is something that was very close to my heart because we have a high unemployment rate in this country. So it will make sense that we should not allow any of these products to be shipped out like they were doing it with gold and diamond. We need to add value to it. And we have capacity and manufacturing facilities here that can do the same. So I think that's where the focus should be as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely, great. So listen, we're running out of time. There's one question I'll ask. So someone asked, Leanne Rimmer asked where they can learn relevant courses on cannabis. So shameless Cheaper Cannabis Academy. There are lots of courses on there, cheaperafrica.com. Take a look at those. In the last minute, I just want you all to give me 1 or 2 words, maybe 3, but no more than 3 words of what you think is in store for this industry. Sib, let's start with you.
Growth, impact, and higher consciousness.
Beautiful. I like it. Brett,
put on the spot there.
You're on mute, Brett. You're on mute.
Muted.
We're in for a period of rock and roll. 3 words.
That's
really rock and roll. Okay, I like it, Pierre.
Yeah, bring the money. Africa loves cannabis, and we can change our country for the better.
Great. Tobacco?
Open the legislation, let the business grow. Let us make products that will be exported to the rest of the world. Let's take South Africa to the rest of the world.
Absolutely. My parting shot and my word is collaboration. We need to work together. The pie is big enough and we need to work together. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to Gib for co-hosting this with us and to Coop. Some amazing stuff. The industry is super exciting. Yes, it's got its challenges, but it's one of the most exciting industries in the world. And it's only going from strength to strength. So any of you watching out there that are interested in investing, please, speak to some of these guys and consider it as an opportunity. A long game. It's not going to happen overnight, but we are working hard, and there is certainly going to be a booming industry in the next few years. From us at Chiba Africa, have an awesome afternoon. Thanks so much, guys. Take care.
Thank you.